Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters on Armstrong Television. This is the show that profiles authors, editors, and publishers in the tri-state region of West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky. And I'm your host, Carter Seaton, and we're delighted to have you with us today. We're on Zoom again because of the pandemic, and we hope we can get back to real life someday soon. But for now, we are delighted to have our guest as Eric Douglas. He is a friend of mine, and he is a fascinating character. You're going to love hearing about him. He spent his childhood watching the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau, and he dreamed of diving alongside the captain. He's a native of Charleston, West Virginia, and he graduated from Marshall University with a degree in journalism, but he never forgot that dream. So he became a diver and then a dive instructor, and he met that goal by pursuing a life of adventure and travel as a diver. He then completed a program at the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke University and jumped into documentary work, creating nonfiction works on lobster divers, war veterans, and cancer survivors. And then he wrote so many books, or has written so many books, that I couldn't name them all in the 30 minutes we've got. He's got a series of 10 books with diver Mike Scott, which is definitely an adventure series. He's written a children's book, 2 collections of short stories, and a long list of nonfiction works. But the fictional stories have got everything a thrill seeker would want: adventure, action, intrigue, set in beautiful places, dive locations. They deal with the environment and scuba diving, among other things. Now he's also the co-producer of the West Virginia Public Broadcasting series called Inside Appalachia, even as he continues writing. You are a busy man, Eric, and we're glad you've taken 30 minutes to talk to us.
Well, thank you for having me. Always good to see you, Carter. Too bad we can't see each other in person, but always good to see you.
Right. All right. First of all, I want to say that we would expect you to be writing for a newspaper maybe, or a magazine with a degree in journalism. And yeah, you've written a lot of nonfiction books, but you tend to focus more on the fiction. What led you to write in fiction? Or do you do both? Do you just genre switch based on whichever one works the best for you?
Well, for what it's worth, I actually still do write a weekly column for the local newspaper, and I do write a monthly column for a scuba diving magazine. So I am still doing that stuff.
Okay, you are still a journalist then.
I am still a journalist, and with the radio production, I get to do my own stories and that kind of thing too. So I'm still very much a journalist. But I grew up reading. Actually, probably my favorite author in my teen years in the 20s was Tom Clancy. I loved the Jack Ryan series. And that for me has been the kind of the inspiration or the goal of the work I do. I don't think I'm anywhere close to Tom Clancy, and I don't necessarily want to duplicate what he does.
No.
But I love that thriller, action, adventure kind of thing. And so when I was in the diving industry full time, I happened to be in Grand Cayman, and had never written fiction before, but I was in Grand Cayman for a couple of weeks and doing some training, doing some work down there. And I just kind of got this idea, we were out doing something, and I just got this vision in my head of what could happen. That I immediately went back to my hotel room, jotted down some notes. When I got home, I ended up writing a scene, and that became the basis for my very first fictional novel, which was, I did this completely the wrong way. My very first work of fiction in general was my first novel called Cayman Cowboys, which was the first book in the Mike Scott series. And it was, and since then I kind of bounce back and forth depending on what comes up. If I stumble into something, I'm not real actively working on it right now, but I have a nonfiction biography that I'm sort of working on slowly. I am also working on a new novel. So yeah, I'm always just switching back and forth depending on the mood that strikes me.
When you say you did it all wrong, what do you mean by that?
Later I started writing some short stories, and frankly, I think I improved my writing ability by starting out in smaller chunks and
Wow.
being able to tell a story in 5,000 words or 10,000 words versus trying to tell a 70 or 80,000 word story. So, and you know, if I went back to it today and tried to write Cayman Cowboys today, I'm sure it would be a different story. It would be, you know, tighter and more action. There's a few, I still like it. I actually reread it recently, and it's like, this is actually not bad. But I'm sure if I had taken the time to grow as an author a little bit more before immediately jumping into writing my first novel, I probably would have improved my writing ability a little bit, or my chops a little bit.
Yeah. So we share a love of scuba diving. I've been to Grand Cayman a couple of times myself. Where's your favorite dive site?
You know, it's almost more, I love when I go to Grand Cayman, I always stay. I've been there 4 times, and every time I've stayed at the same place. It's called Sunset House, which is away from 7 Mile Beach, and it's a resort that's specific to, they cater specific to divers. There's no jet skis, there's no beach, there's none of that other stuff. It's just this little all-inclusive kind of compact place. And really, some of the best dive sites are, I mean, you can just grab a tank and just go fall in the water straight off of their docks, and it's some of the best diving on Grand Cayman is right there. But you know, there's a couple wrecks. I still haven't been on the Kitty Wake, but there's a couple wrecks that I love to visit down there. And yeah, no, it's a beautiful island. I love the island, but yeah, well, and actually right off of Sunset House, about 60 feet down is an 8-foot bronze statue of a mermaid.
Wow.
that everybody has to go down and visit and get your picture taken with, and that kind of thing.
Well, that's cool. Did you ever realize your dream to meet Cousteau?
You know, I've met Jean-Michel. I've met his son. Jacques passed away before I think sometime in the 80s. So yeah, and unfortunately I never got a chance to meet him, but I have met Jean-Michel, had my picture taken with him, and briefly met, and I just lost her name. I don't remember if it's Jean-Michel's daughter or the older son's daughter. Mm-hmm. But I've met two Cousteaus so far.
Well, that's good. Good for you. All right. So many of your nonfiction books do have to do with scuba diving, but one of them, called Heart Survivor, is even more personal than that. Tell us about what brought you to that, and then we're going to get to the novel, I promise, but I want to talk a little bit about you as well.
No, you know, I love to talk about that book. And frankly, it still has a diving connection in it. But I love to talk about that book because I think other people can learn from it, and which is 100% the reason why I wrote that book in the first place. In my job, when I was working full time in the dive industry, my job, I've literally written textbooks about how to do CPR and perform first aid and all this kind of thing. And so I've written the phrase, I've written the signs and symptoms of a heart attack dozens of times, which I promptly ignored when I had my own heart attack. And then about a month later, after the heart attack, the episode that I denied as a heart attack, it scared me enough, or gave me enough pause, that I went forward with setting up a stress test and getting ready for the stress test, or getting my heart checked. And so went in about a month later at the end of January of 2016 for a stress test, failed it miserably, immediately was hospitalized. And about 5 days later, I had a quintuple bypass open heart surgery at 48 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, it was definitely a wake-up call. But in the before I was even let out of the hospital, I'd actually written one of my newspaper columns about, this just happened to me. If you're in the same situation, don't take it lightly and go get checked. And so I kind of began documenting my trip back to health so I could, and my goal immediately before I left the hospital was I'm going to get back in physical shape so I can go back to scuba diving again.
Mm-hmm.
I knew it was possible, but I also knew I had a pretty high bar to meet in cardiac health. So I immediately set to work on that and had that goal for 6 months and pushed myself. And just in time for my 49th birthday, 6 months after the surgery, I went scuba diving here in Summersville Lake here in West Virginia with my father, actually, in celebration of my returning to scuba diving.
That's
But
great.
so then I decided to compile all those stories into a book to again help others. And it's about my drive to get back to scuba diving, but there's a whole bunch of people who've read it who have nothing to do with diving, and they've still gained quite a bit from it. So
Well,
I'm still pretty proud of that book. I get emails from time to time, somebody saying, "Oh, I just read this is the greatest thing ever," and that really makes me feel good.
and it's a wake-up call for other people to pay attention. Good for you.
Absolutely.
Right. Right. So you not only write, you also record other people's stories. You've done that, I think, at Festival and other places, and now
Mhm.
you're the co-producer of Inside Appalachia. How did you get involved in that?
Um, well, the oral histories I started doing. You mentioned the Center for Documentary Studies. I just finished I finished up the certificate program at Center for Documentary Studies at Duke, and then moved back to West Virginia. And I was kind of casting around for projects, and I realized at the time that there was a call out for from the Library of Congress for the Veterans History Project. They were looking for war veterans, uh, oral histories from war veterans. And at the time, this is 2012, I kind of looked back or checked it out. And at the time, there were only 20 oral histories from West Virginia war veterans in the Library of Congress.
Wow.
It's like that's embarrassing. And so I thought, you know what, I can do something about this. And it just kind of set out, and having no real plan of what I would do with it, just set out to start recording these oral histories. And ended up recording 48 oral histories. I only used 46 in the book because a couple of them didn't get completed. We created a documentary and a book out of it to tell these stories and memorialize the history of these West Virginia war veterans. And it just kind of led one thing to another. I was invited to do the oral histories at Festival. I've now recorded 150 oral histories.
Oh,
And it's been pretty amazing, actually, some of the stories I've heard. They're all archived at the West Virginia Archives, including the war veterans, and those are also at the Library of Congress. And yeah, the radio thing just kind of popped up out of that. I was doing radio, I was doing a lot of audio work, and then they happened to need the other producer, Roxy Todd, was actually going on maternity leave, and they needed somebody to step in and keep the show moving while she was gone. And they just haven't told me to go away yet. So
well, it sounds like you're doing something right. That's good.
must be doing something right.
That's right. Are those veterans mostly Second World War or Vietnam?
They ran the gamut from the Second World War up through Afghanistan. I had a good variety. I had probably 5 or 6 from Korea, another dozen or so from Vietnam, and the more modern wars, if you want to use that phrase. It was amazing. I started that beginning of 2012 in Memorial Day of 2013 is when I released the documentary and the book from it. And I think 4 or 5 of the World War II veterans had actually already passed away between the time I recorded them and by the time we were able to release it. So, and I gave every person I recorded, I gave them a copy of the book that had their story in it, but also gave them a copy of the documentary and their recording as well. So their families all had their, a copy of their memories, their recording. So a lot of people were really, really thrilled by that since their loved ones had passed on.
Right. That's a great memento. Right. All right. So your latest book
Is a completely different.
Yes, right. Now for a whole nother subject. You kind of combined, though, your nonfiction historical bent and fiction. It's called Real Thugs, and then there's a subtitle, but I don't remember what that is.
Cult of Murder.
The Cult of Murder. Okay.
Yep.
And you've got a new protagonist, new sleuth, shall we say? Not Mike Scott, a new guy.
Right.
What made you decide to write something about thugs?
So one of the favorite resources I have is Project Gutenberg. It's this resource of online books, of out-of-print books. And I happened to be on there one day and was reading, I had downloaded a book from Mark Twain. Mark Twain was broke at one point in his career, and he went on this round-the-world tour. And so I downloaded this series of books from Mark Twain. While he was in India giving talks, he was talking about this group called the Thuggee. And I was really intrigued by that. And then he mentioned another person who had written a book about the Thuggee. And I was able on Project Gutenberg to also find this other book from like 1850, 1855, something like that. And it's about this group it's a murder cult. It was a group of people who traveled around India killing travelers and just to steal from them. They weren't, there was no satanic ritual or whatever, but they would find rich travelers, they would kill them, hide the bodies, and then just take whatever they had with them. And I was really intrigued by that. And, for a moment I thought, how could Mike Scott tell this story? And it's like, that's just not going to work. I could have, but it would have been forcing it. And then I decided, well, it took me a while. This was one of those stories that kind of sat on the back burner for a while. And I thought about it and finally said, I'm going to create a new character and let's see if we can do that. Mike Scott I never wanted him to be the FBI agent, special ops, rarely guns, that kind of thing. But I thought, I've read a bunch of those kind of books, and I thought I want to tell one of those stories, and that's where Agent A.J. West came from, was a desire to tell a little bit more traditional thriller type novel around the Thuggee, and then the obvious other thing is I brought the Thuggee to America and into present day. It was an interesting challenge, and like in a lot of my books, it bounces back and forth a little bit from historic to modern day and that kind of thing. I tend to do that a lot, but it was a lot of fun to write.
A little bit about the plot. Don't give anything away, but just a little bit.
Yeah. So there's a group in India is putting together, is basically trying to put the Thuggee back together, but they've sent them the first group. There's 5 guys in this group traveling around kind of the mid-Atlantic states committing murders. They're really not in it for the money though, but they're not 100%. I think probably the best thing I can say about them is they're really not sure why they're doing it themselves. They've been misled. They've been told we're bringing back the cult, and we're worshiping our goddess and doing this sort of thing. But there's kind of a secondary purpose that they're not aware of yet. So they're basically serial killers who are being manipulated themselves. Is that enough?
That's good. Yeah, it's a real page turner. I have to say that this program has enabled me to read books that I probably never would normally turn to, because I'm not really a thriller reader. But this is one, and I just read Meredith Sue Willis's Soledad in the Desert, which is sci-fi. And those are 2 things I don't normally read. So it's introduced me to a whole couple
And you
of
got to love
times.
that.
Yeah, I've loved it. Yeah. So it is a real page turner. And I wanted to find out do you have a specific technique for how you create that tension to keep people turning the page to the next chapter to find out what's going on?
So I've been told by a lot of people that they can see what I'm describing. And I think I actually write, the way I try to write is what, I don't know if it's cinematic or whether it's more television with cliffhangers, especially the old school days of TV. And I'm not, anyway, the old school days of TV, there would be cliffhangers at commercial breaks and cliffhangers at the end of episodes and that kind of thing. It's kind of my wife's running joke. Whenever there's a sort of a cliffhanger on a show today, we look at each other and go, dun, dun, dun. I want my readers to kind of have that same cliffhanger at the end of every chapter, or, I want them to be not major surprises, but, constant surprises, constant building as they go through it. So I think I kind of write, maybe I learned my writing technique from watching television in the 70s or something. So it's that slowly build type of process.
I can see what you're talking about. My husband and I recently watched all 12 seasons of NYPD Blue, and you can tell when it cuts to black that there's always a little tension right there before it cuts to black. So I know what you're talking about.
And, for what it's worth, I think the binging of TV has actually brought that back, where, Netflix does these seasons of 10 episodes that have a story arc through the 10 episodes. To me, I kind of see my books like a 10 episode story arc.
I understand. Yeah. So is this a new adventure series with a new protagonist? Is he going to be doing other things on like dry land instead of?
I think so. I really liked AJ. And there's a story behind AJ too, but I really liked AJ, and I had fun with her to be able to tell that story. So yeah, where Mike Scott's the environmental and gallivanting around the world, AJ is just a solid FBI agent, kind of fun character that I had fun with. I have to tell you my story about AJ real fast. There's been a lot of discussion in writers groups and some mutual friends of ours about whether a man, myself, could write a woman character or a female character. I've certainly had female characters in my books, and I think all of my female characters have been strong, solid characters to begin with. But I've never written the main protagonist as a female. And so it was a bit of a challenge for me to see if I could write one. I mean, I knew I could write one. The challenge was could I write a good one? And I think I did okay with it. She's one of the biggest complaints is men writing female characters. They tend to be kind of hypersexualized, and there's none of that in the book. She's just a strong, investigative character. A little bit of a pain in the neck sometimes to her partner, but mainly because she's pretty driven. But I didn't. There was none of that. Oh, she's a weak female. Everybody should pity her, or that's how she became so tough. No, those are cliches that I didn't want to go down.
She sort of reminded me in her drive of Carrie in Homeland.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's that kind of person. Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad she's going to reappear.
She'll be back. There's probably a couple things in line before I get back around to her, but she will be back.
In general, what is it that inspires you to write a book, particularly fiction?
Particularly the fiction, especially with the Mike Scott stuff. And I've written 10 of those, so I think that's the one I can talk the most about. And there's 3 or 4 short stories and that kind of thing too in that same universe, if that's the word you want to use. I am very passionate about the ocean. I am very passionate about the especially the aquatic environment and that sort of thing. And I love to entertain. I love to have people say, I love this book. It was so much fun, whatever. But at the same time, I love it when they say, and I learned something. Or I was inspired by something. There's a lot of people, you and I do share the love of scuba diving. A lot of people will never, for whatever reason, never make a dive. They'll never go scuba diving. But I hope to, especially for those people, they can read my books. And I try to keep the diving as realistic as possible, but I don't want to over explain it so somebody gets bogged down by the technical. And I want especially the non-divers to read it and go, well, that's really cool. And that's really interesting. Maybe I can do something about that, even though I'll never go scuba diving in my life. So that's kind of my motivation. I try not to be pedantic about it and beat people over the head with stuff, but I want people to see another part of the world that they maybe never had the chance to visit before, and to appreciate it.
That's great. Do you have a specific writing routine every day?
As much as possible. I've talked to other writers. I don't know about you, but you would think during this pandemic, when we're all stuck at home and nothing to do, that we'd be even more productive. Yeah. So anyway, I actually use I used to Scrivener to write my books in. Anything, if it's a magazine article, whatever, I just do that in Word. But I really like Scrivener and the writing environment in Scrivener for book writing. But yeah, I try to do it in the morning as much as possible before that's when I feel like my brain's the sharpest. But and the drill too, a couple hours of actual writing time. I can usually crank out 1,500 to 2,000 words in a couple hours if I'm in a good run. Some days are 500 or 600 words, and you just say, all right, well, we got through that. But yeah, usually try to mid-morning. I will get up and check emails and that kind of thing. A lot of the writing advice says, don't even check email, or I do. Try to stay off of social media because that's a complete time suck. But a couple hours in the morning, and then after that, I can deal with other things.
I understand. Yeah, it's interesting. Almost every writer that I know has said the same thing, that the pandemic did not give them the creativity time that they thought they wanted. It's something about the mindset of just having that stressor that just kind of has tamped down everything. I understand that.
And I have a tablet. Unfortunately, Scrivener does not work on it, but I'll every once in a while write. I've written a couple short stories on my tablet, because then I can go sit out on my patio and stare at the trees and write that way. It's slower writing that way than with a full keyboard, but I've actually probably been more successful at columns and magazines and that kind of stuff writing off of my tablet, sitting on my patio than anything else. No worries.
So what's next? You said something about a nonfiction piece and another novel.
I'm working.
Juggling.
I'm juggling. I actually have a new Mike Scott in the works. I'm about 30,000 words into that. The Mike Scotts usually run 85 to 90,000 words. So we're about a third of the way into a Mike Scott. And I also, a number of years ago, I did some nonfiction work, magazine stuff about a doctor in Honduras who treats the mosquito Indians who scuba dive for lobster, and they get really horribly injured, sometimes die. And so I did a couple magazine pieces about him. And last year, actually just about this time last year, I actually went down, he's in Houston at the moment, and I went down there and sat with him and recorded about 8 hours worth of interviews. So ultimately that will be a biography piece about the work he's done and about him and his backstory. It's slow going for some reason, but again, the last 6 months, everything's just come off, the wheels have come off of everything. But Yeah, so those are my two big projects at the moment.
Well, that sounds like enough to keep you off the streets.
Absolutely.
Eric, thank you so much for joining us today on Chapters. It's a delight, and I'm sure our viewers would love to know where to get some of your books. Can you tell us that?
The easiest place to get everything, or the kind of the central starting point, is booksbyeric.com. I've had that same website address since I wrote my first book, but it's books with an S, multiple. I was optimistic that there would be more than one, but it could have been Book by Eric, and then it would have been obsolete. But yeah, booksbyeric.com. There's actually, I'm about to, probably in the next couple of weeks, we'll release a new audiobook of the original book. The first book, Cayman Cowboys. There's short stories on there, and then links to all of the novels and the nonfiction as well.
That's great. Okay, thank you. Booksbyeric.com. Thanks again for coming. We really appreciate it. That'll be it for us today on Chapters, but please come again next time. And in the meantime, stay tuned to this station, Armstrong Television, for the news and views that impact you and your community. I'm Carter Seaton. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Connect with Chapters through email. Write to lp4@zoominternet.net. Chapters has a Facebook page at Armstrong Chapters. Like, subscribe, share, and comment. All Chapters episodes are available on YouTube. Visit the Armstrong Neighborhood channel on YouTube and look for a playlist of all the Chapters programs.